Quick disclaimer. This channel does not promote, encourage, endorse, or glorify the use of legal or illegal psychoactive substances. This is simply a harm reduction education video disguised as entertainment. What's up, guys? It's Psychedelical coming at you with another video. And today, as you can probably tell from the title, we're here to talk about the time I took 7 grams of mushrooms. And these weren't just any mushrooms, these were actually penis envy mushrooms, which some of you may know are substantially stronger than your normal cubensis varieties. Before we get into the meat and potatoes of this trip report, which I know is what all you guys are probably here for, I just need to say that this is what I consider my first trip. Some of you may be confused because I made a video previously saying my first mushroom trip. I didn't really trip when I took them. That was my first time with mushrooms, but this was my first trip. So now that that's out of the way, we can kind of get into this. Alright, so my first time trying shrooms was down at the river. You can find that in my channel. My first video, I forget what it was, but there's a picture of some guy on it and says smoking shrooms at the river. I'll link that in the description below if I remember. Alright, so 7 gram trip report starts here. So buying them. So when I got a hold of these mushrooms, I had actually been looking for them for quite a while, and the first time I tried them, a friend just happened to have some, and he didn't really have a plug or anything, so we couldn't get more. My guy, who I had been buying weed from for a couple of years at that point, posted that he had some mushrooms, and I think I paid a ridiculous price. I got taxed hard on these, but these were the first mushrooms that he posted on his channel, and he only had like an ounce at that time. And I decided, oh, well, I'm going to buy a 1/4 ounce because I don't know why, but I really was just chasing that ego death that everybody talked about. I had one good experience with like a light macro dose. We didn't weigh it, but it couldn't have been more than a 1/2 gram. I had one good experience with that, and I decided I wanted ego death. I wanted what everybody was talking about. And I didn't even know what tripping was yet, really. So, I hit him up. I said I wanted a 1/4 ounce. I think I paid like $120 for it. It was ridiculous. But I buy the mushrooms, and forget if I took them that day or the day after. But no, it was definitely that day. Yeah. I took them that night at, I forget what time, but I think it was around 7. And I had been contemplating on what dose to take, and I had originally decided on taking 4 grams, but I had been joking with my friends that I would take all 7. 4 grams is still way, way, way too much for an inexperienced user, especially somebody who has not actually tripped yet. But still, I ate my original 4 grams, and I started to come up. Now, here's where I want to talk a little bit about my set and setting. So, my set was alone in my bedroom at 16 years old. My younger brother had a friend over, sleeping over, and both of my parents were downstairs in the middle of their separation. So this is a great set, obviously. Great place to trip. Not. It was a terrible set. I had no clue what I was doing. I was just young and naive. And my setting was, I was just this kind of depressed, anxious kid who smoked a lot of pot and played a lot of video games. And so, really not somebody that should be indulging in psychedelics, never mind this level of psychedelia. So, I take the mushrooms, 4 grams, and I start coming up, And I think I was playing video games with some people that I'm no longer really friends with, but I was playing video games with them, and I was playing Rocket League, I remember, and my vision started to get really weird. Like, I still can't really describe it, but I started to see Rocket League in 4D, which was pretty ridiculous when you say it out loud, but at the time it was pretty cool. But that was where the visuals kind of slowed down for a while, and I got a little disappointed, because I thought I should be at the peak for some reason. And so that was when I asked some of the guys that I was playing games with if I should take more. Mind you, none of them were experienced with this kind of stuff. Maybe a couple of them had tried a small dose once or twice, but none of them were experienced enough to be able to say yes or no. They should have said no, but I was already determined, so who knows what would have happened if they said no. But they said, yeah, you should take the rest of them. And so I did. I ate the other 3 grams, and that was when the original 4 started hitting me harder. I had just been in the come up. I was still in the come up, but they were just coming on harder. And I looked out my window and I could hardly hold my head up, and there was just eyes in the trees, and there was this tunnel of colors and stripes going down to the road. And this was when I started to I can't remember everything so well past this point, because this was where a very intense trip started. So at this point, I got off the video games, and I do remember I would get on and join the party for a few minutes and maybe speak some gibberish, ask them what was going on, but I was just losing my senses of reality. And I literally could not tell what my physical body was doing, and I would have these small moments of clarity where I would just go, what's going on right now? And then I would just be swept back into what felt like insanity. And at this point, I started to feel like I was too hot. So I remember I went and stood in front of my AC, and that got me too cold because I was sweating. So I turned the AC off, and then I started to get hot again. But this time I took off my clothes. I was fully naked in my room. And I was still getting too hot. So I turned the AC on, and then I would get too cold, and then I would put my clothes on. And I did that for about 30 or 40 minutes. That's what I think. It could have been 5. It felt like that long. But eventually I came to the realization that I was laying in a pile of dirty laundry in front of my AC, naked in my room. And if one of my parents came up to my room to check on me, I would be totally fucked. So I turned the AC on, put my clothes on, and went back into my bed because that's the only place I felt comfortable at this moment. And so now that the kind of naked AC cycle was over, I was laying in my bed, and I don't really remember why, but I decided to stand up to see what that would be like and try and look out my window. And when I did, I got stuck. I couldn't move from the place where I was standing, and my knees almost buckled, actually. Like, I was fighting with my knees bent, trying to stay standing. My back's, like, I'm barely able to stand. I'm pretty much doing a tweaker lean. And I just started to think, like, wow, this is my first time doing, like, getting really fucked up and doing real drugs like this. Like, what would my parents think? Like, and then I started to think about what my mom would think, and I figured she would be so disappointed in me. And I just felt this deep, deep, deep shame. And this is where the trip really took a turn for the worse. Before it was just confusion, but now it was these negative emotions of feeling, like, of shame and guilt, and like, I shouldn't be doing this, but I am, and I can't stop it. And I started to kind of panic. And eventually I had decided that the best thing to do would be to go downstairs and try and talk to one of my parents without letting them know I was tripping on 7 grams of penis envy mushrooms. So I went downstairs, and my mom had gone to bed at this point. I think it was like 9 or 10 at night, probably. And my dad was up watching TV, probably drunk and stoned. But he saw me come into the room, and he had the lights off in the room. Or no, he had the lights on in the room. I remember I came in there, and he had the lights on. And I had decided that I would just sit on the other end of the couch and talk to him. And I do not know how, but I somehow managed to have a small conversation with him. And then I went over to the light switch because I realized that he might see my eyes, and that would be a dead giveaway. So I went over to the light switch, and I went and I tried to hit the light switch once. And I missed. I had tried to hit it again, and I didn't put my hand out far enough. And finally, the third time's the charm. I hit the light switch, it turns off, and I go sit back down on the couch. And it was at this point that I had, for some reason, decided that I really wanted to go swimming. But I also had to use the bathroom. And that was an interesting experience. So I grabbed some swim trunks, and I went into the bathroom to use the bathroom and change into my swim trunks. And as I was doing my business in there, I was just tripping hard. I couldn't even figure out what I was doing. Like, it took me what felt like way too long to figure out, alright, we're good, we can change clothes and go swimming. And as embarrassing as that kind of is for me to say on the internet, it's what happened, and I want to give you guys the true story, so that was what happened. Yeah, and then after I changed into my bathing suit, I went out into the yard with a towel and went into our above-ground swimming pool. And I remember just floating around looking up at the stars, and all the grass in our yard had eyes staring back up at me. And I was just tripping so hard. And it was just honestly unbearable at a certain point. And so eventually I decided, alright, this is enough of this. I just don't want to be out here anymore. I got out of the pool, went back in, and it took me, I believe, it felt like it took me 30 minutes to change back into my clothes out of my bathing suit. I was just tripping so hard. And I remember after I had changed back into my clothes, I decided there's no way I can talk to my dad at this point. And I think this was really the point when the other 7 grams, or the other 3 grams that I took were really starting to hit hard, because this is when I really started to descend into madness. Now, I stopped in the kitchen on my way back up to my room, and I decided that I would try and eat something. I opened the fridge, looked at all the food, and went, I cannot eat right now. And then went back upstairs. That's pretty indicative of tripping too hard. But anyways, I went upstairs, And it was at this point, the next thing I remember was I was very, very nauseous. And I felt like I was going to throw up. And I stood up and grabbed my trash can in my room. And I remember I felt like I was getting dizzy, so I leaned into the corner of my room. And at this point, I really thought about going back downstairs and just telling my dad that I had taken 7 grams of mushrooms. But I decided against that in the end, but I was very close at one point. And I didn't throw up, but I felt terribly nauseous and just way too hot, and I was spinning. It was terrible. And I remember at this point I looked up and my ceiling had opened up into this crazy, like, hall of spirits, like opening into a spirit world almost. It was insane looking. And it just went on forever and ever, up and up and up and up. And at that point I decided that this was where I made a very critical, crucial mistake. This is where I decided to try and go to sleep on the peak of 7 grams of penis envy mushrooms. And if anybody has watched anything from somebody named Terrence McKenna, he believes, or his philosophy was 5 dried grams in a dark room. And so 7 dried grams in a dark room ought to get you somewhere. And so in my silent dark room, essentially meditating on 7 grams of penis envy mushrooms, never having tripped before, I went to some places that I was not ready for. And this part really messed me up. And we'll get to that in part 2. But part 1 is just the trip for everybody that just wants to hear about that. The effects will be in part 2. Or like the after effects. But at this point, I remember melting away into my bed, and I just went into darkness, and out of the darkness there came this mirror, almost, is what it looked like. It was this big, like, complex, geometrically framed mirror that was just flipping through faces, and the faces were people that I recognized, even if I had no clue why I recognized them. Like, it was almost like everybody that I had ever interacted with or seen, even for a second, their face was on that mirror, and it was flipping through them at crazy speeds. And until it landed on my face. And when it did that, everything turned red and changed and morphed until I was looking at and almost experiencing, but not actually being in, this dark, red, confusing... It was almost like a picture that you can experience being in, but you aren't actually in it. It was just confusing, and it wasn't... I'm not going to say that it was hell or something, because I don't really know, but it was pure evil. I do know that. It was a very bad place. Sorry for that sound. It was a very bad place. And after this was where I had something that is very well talked about among psychonaut communities. I had my first white light experience, and I've only had one other one since then, but that's for another video. This one was my first, and I had never even heard about a white light experience before having had it, so it was very alarming. And for people who have not had a white light experience, they're typically pretty similar. But essentially what happens is everything around you becomes this white, bright, geometric light that you can feel and communicate with, and you're there with it forever. But the problem with that is that if you're there forever and you come back at some point, it's impossible to be there forever. So it sparks a lot of theories about where you actually go or what happens. I'm not sure. I've had a few theories before, but I'm not here to get into that today. But the white light, you're there forever, and no time at all, really, if that makes sense. And the light is everything and nothing. And it all sounds really contradictory and all like, ooh, shamany, blah, blah, blah. But it really does feel that way when you're there. I don't really want to put a label on it because I really just don't know what it is. But it was something extremely powerful and I believe extremely real. And after that white light experience, the next thing I remember is opening my eyes in my bed and looking at the clock, and it was 2:30 in the morning. So I had probably decided to try and fall asleep around 11 and laid there for almost 4 hours, tripping this all out. And by the time I opened my eyes and it was 2:30 in the morning, I was still extremely high from the mushrooms and probably still even tripping a little bit, but I went downstairs, used the bathroom, drank some water. I think I ate some grapes even, and I just decided I was so tired, I just had to go to bed. And I was drained. I actually went to sleep after that, and I woke up the next day, and I was in total astonishment of what the fuck had just happened to me. And we'll get into that in part 2 of this video. I'm sorry to do that, but I really do feel that part 1 should be, or this topic needs 2 parts. Part 1, just the actual trip, and part 2, the after effects, because this trip actually threw me into a bout of psychosis that lasted 1.5 years. So that's what part 2 will be about when I record that. Other than that, I hope you guys have a great day. I'm having a great day myself, and thanks for watching. Peace.